I have come to adopt the notion that life-work balance is a myth. It's a total myth. To have a perfect balance of your professional career and your personal goals and your personal aspirations, it's just not really possible. And the title of this week's episode rather is Life and Work Integration. And I put life before work on purpose there. And that's some weeks you may need to dedicate more of yourself to your professional practice. Or when we're able to travel again, hopefully for 2021, the AIA and ASLA national conventions will happen again. And you may need to devote more of yourself to networking and peer outreach and professional development and that sort of thing. And then, of course, weeks always come up, whether you have a family with children or not, whether you are single, dating, married or not, that your personal life takes precedent, even in health issues. So the theme of integration, I feel, is such a better term for our lives as design professionals and our lives as, well, human beings. And we're going to touch on all those points this week with my guest, Mandy Freeland. Stay tuned. Giving architects and landscape architects the tools and strategies to be seen, heard, and valued in the marketplace, and telling the stories of leaders building thriving design firms and attracting their ideal clients. This is From Architecture to Profitecture. I'm your host, Jay Krakowski. Let's get started. Fellow and future Profitex, hello, how are you? Welcome to this week's show. This week I have Mandy Freeland, an architect based in California. She's actually going to be calling into us from a site meeting in Visalia, California. She is currently principal of Mandy Freeland Architects Incorporated that she founded back in June of 2015, actually a month before I started my firm. And she's currently the Young Architect Regional Director for AIA Southern California. We're going to talk about all those things I mentioned in the intro. So welcome to the show, Mandy. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I'd like to jump right in, really at the point where you made the decision or started to make the decision, maybe where the seed was planted to go from being an employee to owning your own firm.
So sort of a long story. I guess you could say I took the long road in getting my license. I took the parenting path on getting my license. I did my education. After I graduated college, I got married and had my first son. And then a few years later, had my second. I only have two. But I felt like that was a good time to take the exams to become licensed, but I wasn't, I really felt that being with them during their early years was important. So I sort of took my time during their young years and on taking the exams and getting the license. And 5 years ago, in 2015, I did get my license. And from what I had experienced in firms in my region, I felt that I could do it too, that I could own a business. I went to school for architecture, but then I went back to school for communications and public relations. I wanted to have a broader education because I felt like I already knew that I didn't want to just be an architect. I wanted to do something bigger in the world of architecture, whether it was running a firm or being in a high level in a firm in operations or something. And then working at firms in my region, I learned pretty quickly with my previous employment working for general contractors that had in-house licensed architects that I knew a lot when I got licensed. I had a lot of it. I think I had 14 years of working experience when I got my license in 2015. So when I got my license, I was really ready to start a firm and to do it myself and to kind of figure it out along the way. My husband is a plumbing contractor and he has owned his own business with his dad. My husband's whole life has been his dad's business and his business. So learning everything about running a business from him and his dad and the construction side of it, it just made sense for me to also just jump and just start a business. And so that's how I got started. I got my license, I think in April, and then started my firm in June of 2015.
It's such a great point. Not to poo-poo the formal education system, that the notions of communications and marketing and just running a business are there's such a gap there between when you start out as an architect or landscape architect to becoming a firm owner. There's a chasm to cross there. So that's great that you had that experience. I had a little bit of the same track. Not being married to a contractor, but having some construction management experience thrown in, in addition to design. Actually, there were a long number of months where I didn't design a darn thing. I think that serves me, and it sounds like it served you as well. So at what point did you start to become involved in the AIA leadership?
Soon after I was not an AIA member during my career until after I got licensed and started my firm. And then I felt like I needed to give it a chance and see what it was about, and probably network with other architects in town. So I did. I joined AIA, and the local chapter was actually missing their board vice president, which is the president-elect for the following year. So not long after I joined AIA, I went to a couple meetings, and I was asked if I could serve on the board, and I said yes. And they said, are you willing to serve as the VP and president next year? And so I said, okay, that's how I got involved in AIA. I felt like I jumped in full over my head and did a lot to improve the chapter. We changed a lot of the protocols and the policies. We started committees that were not there before. That year, I received a presidential citation. It's an award of excellence from the AIA California president for my excellence in leadership. So that was really great, because it was a lot of work to get the chapter back energized and invigorated and get committees going again. And I think we've been doing great ever since.
In working through those challenges, were there kind of lessons you were able to pull over into your role as a principal?
So they did a special training with me and taught me how to run a nonprofit and how to do marketing the AIA way, the way that a very large professional association does things. And so I did learn. I learned leadership. I learned organization. I learned marketing on a very big level. I learned just accountability to your audiences, for AIA, the audience is the members and it's the general public. For a private business, your audience is your clients. It's also the general public, the people that you serve in your community, and it's your employees. So I learned a lot. And I contribute. AIA gets a lot of the credit for that. They paid a lot of money and sent me places where I was able to learn a lot from them. So
you've been running a firm for a few years now, and just recently, actually on New Year's Eve, you started the Parents in Architecture Facebook group with a couple other peers, Gloria Cloder and Brian Penshaw. Can you talk a little bit about how that came together?
So we have a mutual friend, Michael Rosica, who runs the ARE boot camp for test takers. And he also has the youngarchitects.com. And last year in 2018 did his first conference. And in his first conference, he really wanted to bring speakers and presentations to this demographic of the next generation of architects that specifically addressed the needs of this generation. And one of the things that he noticed, we were friends for a little while, a few years, and I'm a huge supporter of his, and he became a supporter of mine, seeing like on Facebook my posts of my kids and going to baseball games and going to basketball games, and just 100% mom on Facebook, but trying to be 100% professional in the professional world. So he was one of the only sort of people in the architecture world that I let into my personal world, because the Facebook world was very personal to me and I didn't want to share the lives of my children with anyone in that world. So
Mm-hmm.
it was very much a he asked me to be a speaker at his conference last year, and I said yes, but I was a little bit like, I don't want to mix personal with professional, and I don't. But he was very much, and everything that I learned in the professional world was, you don't ask for time off to go see your kid's game, or you don't, if your kid's getting an award in school, and you try and ask for like an hour off to go to the assembly, it was just looked down upon. And it's like internal pressure in the workplace where it's not allowed to do stuff like that, to take off time for those special moments. And that's something that I want to change. And as a business owner, I feel I have an obligation to really change that now. And I'm, working towards that. But it did start with Michael asking me to speak to the people that were attending the conference. And I thought, okay, that's okay. I could do this, talk to them about being a parent, talk to them about, my kids were older. And when I got to the conference, a lot of the people, the attendees, were not parents yet. And they had a lot of fears, and they weren't sure what to ask, but they had a lot of concerns about pausing their career, or how old, like, do you like, as a woman, do you try and get higher up the ladder while you're still young and then have children in your later 30s? Because sort of as a woman, if you take a pause in your career in your 20s and try and come back, it might be a lot harder to come back into the career after your kids are of school age, where you can kind of go back to work. So we talked about things. We talked about fears. We talked to the young men that were doing it too. They had as many fears as the women did, if not more. And I thought that was admirable. So at that conference, let's see, Brian Pinchot was there, and he is a father of 2 young girls. And I asked him if he would contribute to on the side of the father. That I had a feeling that the young men were going to have questions about fatherhood, and is it okay for the dads to ask for time off of work? And is it okay to be a stay-at-home dad if your wife has, a full-time career? Like, how does that work? So he did step in and he answered some good questions too. And then our mutual friend Gloria Cloder was there at the conference as well. And she didn't have any kids yet. And her husband was with her at the conference. And she reached out to me when she became pregnant later that year. And she said she's pregnant and she had a lot of questions too. And I was like, wow, I feel a little bit like the go-to like parent in architecture a little bit. So we talked and talked, and I said, you know what, we should Michael really wanted us to have a forum online to give people of this generation a place to talk, like a place to go over employment issues and hiring issues and discrimination and frustrations that you feel when you are career bound on a professional level, and trying to juggle the parenthood obligations. We started the group. We had a chat. We started the group. We started the 3 of us, and we taking conversations, and we asked the questions. And the pandemic hit, and everyone was sent home to work, and the kids were sent home to do school, and all of the schools, fell apart, and put it all on the parents to somehow work and teach the kids and keep them on task. And that was a crazy struggle for a lot of parents. So it just happened to be a good time to start that group. So we started. We still have really good conversations.
It was very fortuitous. I mean, I'm a part of the group too, and a father of 2 as well. I actually, my first son was actually the final impetus for me to start my firm, because I was on the road so much as a traveling construction manager, and I was not going to be spending uh, 27 days out of the month in other states while he, grew up. So a little bit of a different story, but you touched on some great points. First, I wish I had gone to that conference last year. I had my list, and I was kind of going through some, and then Young Architect Conference came up, and I said, I'll do it in 2020. So if only I had known. but um, but no, you touch on a couple of points and you mentioned it in a comment on Facebook earlier today before this recording, that often parenting is almost seen as a weakness by some firm owners or firm leaders, which is, when you put it like that, it's almost a little shocking to have. And I don't know your experience in being the design component in a contracting firm and having, I don't know how big the design staff was that would be leaving early, or it was just in your case. Was it really just you that had this tension between needing to stay in the office and versus seeing kid stuff?
My first year is when, so I worked for a design build contractor that had in-house designers, architects, and engineers. And that was actually the most family friendly place that I worked.
Okay.
My boss, I had worked there for 1 year when I got pregnant, and let him know that I was, the owner of the company. I said, and it was a pretty big growing company. But I went to him and I told him I'm pregnant. And he said, okay, just let me know what you need. And so I bypassed my managers and talked to him about it. And when it came time to have the baby, after the baby, when my maternity leave was about ready, I said, I don't think I can leave him. And so he let me stay at home for 2.5 years until my son could go to preschool.
That's amazing.
But then later, after the recession happened and layoffs happened, I got work at firms, at architecture firms for the first time. So my first time not working in a family-friendly environment, it was tough to get off time. It was tough. It was tough when you were marked late, when you were like 15 minutes late, like calling in sick because your child's sick, but using your own PTO to get time off was looked down upon. I just felt very much like, and even internally, peer-to-peer, colleague to colleague, they made me know that in their house, they were the worker and their wife was at home with the kids. So what do you say to that? That's not how my husband and I chose to do this. My husband loves the kids. He has a flexible schedule himself. He's a business owner. And so he was always happy to pick up the kids after school or take them to practice, or, that's what we worked out between us, but it wasn't exactly fair for that pressure, if that makes any sense.
And then I think with all the events of this year, I think it's going to push that conversation forward, that you can find great staff and you can let them be remote 4 days a week. Well, what's the harm? Really, what's the harm? Because, as long as you've got a connection to the server, you should be good to go. And yeah, the little of the camaraderie is missed, but you can still be an integral part of a firm.
So I did it 15 years ago when my son was born. Like 15 years ago, I stayed home for 2 years. So if I could do it back then, we can definitely do it now. Like definitely. I think there has to be I think parents need to speak out. And I think the bosses of the companies, the decision makers, need to know that it's important to their staff that they can, when you have kids, you only have a very short time with them in all of their little phases of their childhoods. Right. And you don't want to miss that. You don't want to let your boss down, but you also, it's your kids. You don't want to miss those baseball games. Those are goals like that. You need to be there for that.
Right. There will always be more projects. There probably won't be any more kids, at least not in my house. But yeah, there will always be more projects, and there will definitely always be more work to do. So whether in balancing family and work, or even just in running a firm, What have been the big challenges that you've met or had to overcome?
So when I started my firm, my kids were older. It would have been a lot harder when they were younger, like toddlers, when they needed a lot of my attention. Now they can take care of themselves. They are 12 and 15. And my husband is home with them. The biggest challenges are me traveling and I feel like there's less challenges right now with my own business because I can take off whatever time I need to, and I can work at midnight if I need to. So I feel like it's less challenging and it's less stressful than it was before. Before when I worked at an architecture firm, I had a schedule where I had to be in at 7:30 in the morning and I was out at 5:30. It was 4 9s and a 4, so half days on Fridays. And the boss felt like that was great for if you had doctor's appointments or needed to, have, an elongated weekend to have half days Friday. But getting to work at 7:30 with kids means daycare in the early morning before school. And that's no fun. And then leaving at 5:30 never happens. Leaving when work ends never happens anyway. You're always there longer. So I was getting home at like 6:30 and spending very little time with them and getting them back up super early in the morning just so I could work, just so I could have a job. Like I did not feel like that was the way that it's supposed to be. And my boss felt like he was being very gracious with that schedule.
In balancing all that, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that with your communications background, maybe marketing was one of the easier parts of running a firm. Is that true?
Oh yeah. So marketing, I know that you focus on marketing. I did want to talk about marketing a little bit. Doing public relations, so I felt like I definitely had an advantage when I started a firm. I knew how to address a message to an audience, which is something that architects need to learn how to do. Finding clients, finding out how clients get their information, who they talk to first. Do they talk to banks first and get lending? Do they talk to real estate people first and get land? Do they talk to contractors first because they're doing a remodel? Or if they're doing a house, maybe they're talking to contractors first, and then you're working through the contractor, or you're working through the real estate agent, or you're getting contacts through an insurance agent, which happens sometimes when they're going to their insurance agent for financial advice, which happens too. It's finding out how they're getting there, who they're contacting first, and who's referring who. Learning how the systems work, and there's a lot of systems that work in how people start projects. Learning how to do that and making the contacts in all of those specific areas helped me a lot. And when I started out offering services that were not offered in my area. So I provide a service called BIM management for pre-construction services for design build contracts. And what that really is in the BIM world, in the 3D modeling world, is I do clash detection, not as an architect, but I do clash detection on what the architects and engineers, when they do their 3D models, they provide them to me, I put them all together, and I see what's clashing together. And it's a requirement in the contract. So I actually work for the general contractor. He has to provide that service. And it's intended to prevent change orders in the field. So I got my foot in the door right away when I started my business, having BIM management contracts outside of, it's not traditional architecture at all. I'm not even using my stamp for it. It's a contract that goes like for a certain duration of months, and you have monthly meetings and income coming in. So right away, I didn't have to look for work. I didn't have to look for new projects. I could take it slower and learn about, all of the different niches in the area and how the people and who are they talking to. And I took my time making the contacts and building the network and building the reputation.
When you were talking about BIM clash detection, that you were not doing it as an architect. And do you just mean contractually, or are you looking at it through a different lens with your contracting background?
So I wasn't the architect of record, and I didn't have to use my stamp, and I had no design scope of work in it at all. All I had to do was follow up with what the architects and engineers were doing, and I was a third party. So that said, on your second, what you just said, the second thing that you said, I absolutely used all of my architecture expertise and my knowledge of construction phasing, scheduling, estimating, how that all works in the real world. And I use that on both sides, but in this way, it benefits the contractor. So, and it could be bringing information to the architects and engineers that I feel like maybe not a lot of architects and engineers have a lot of construction practical knowledge of how things go in the field. And just bringing that in can introduce knowledge to them, saying, these plumbing pipes would be going in phase wise before, one of the other phases, one of the other trades. And so we need to prioritize, like drain lines because they're, fed on gravity and they need to be first prioritized, and then design other trades around, waste plumbing lines. It's kind of a simple concept, but when you know stuff like that, then you can figure out how to design the rest of the 3D model based on phasing. I wore both hats on that one. Building your reputation online is really important, and I feel like that's something that architects could also learn how to do. Because when you Google search somebody, like everybody's going to Google search you. Like what comes up? So when I Google, Jake, I Google searched you.
Uh-oh.
Have you Googled yourself? It's all Jane Krakowski, the actress. I'm like, Jake.
She's funny.
I can't find you in any of
hold on
this.
a second. Because the first name and the last name are both spelled differently. So
I know. And it kept saying, do you want, like, it kept suggesting like a different spelling, Jane Krakowski. Well. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
I see. So, suggested. I mean, Jane. The letters aren't too far apart, but I guess I got to work on my SEO. That's funny. When you talk about building up your presence, have you had a specific focus as far as maybe platform or content that you put out there?
My favorite recommendation for anybody is to get other people to talk about you, because they have, especially established other companies, entities, nonprofits, whatever you're working with, have them interview you or be a speaker or be a presenter or something, and have them market you, and you show up in their marketing network. You show up in everybody that's following them, and then people start following you. It's like a tag back. So my first suggestion is to get other people to mention you and find ways on doing that. That's so much bigger than trying to build when you're starting out, to trying to build your own foundation and your own followers. If you can borrow the followers of other people who already have established followers and a big broad network, then you're tapping into an asset that they've built, and you're starting your own foundation from theirs.
That's a great point. Coming at it almost as that you're a guest, or you're a media person, but before you're an architect. I know that's something that Gary Vaynerchuk says a lot. If you follow him, as you're starting out, you're interfacing with local engineers and contractors, and you're bringing them on to a show like this, even if it doesn't have to be live, it doesn't have to be a podcast per se, but you are allowing them to highlight their expertise, and then that's going out to their audience, and lo and behold, there's your name and face. So I think that's a great circle of life there. For anyone that's thinking about or recently ventured out into starting a firm, are there any lessons learned or other tips, suggestions you might share?
So first suggestion, definitely build your reputation. Everyone else that you're competing against has built their reputation over time, over 10, 20, 30 years. And so if you're starting a company, you really need to start out building your reputation, getting out there, maybe working for nonprofits, maybe joining local historic preservation, getting involved in maybe community design or something, doing something for free for somebody, for a community. Building your reputation in the way that makes a good name for yourself is really important, because when people are looking for, if someone drops your name and says, I know this person, I recommend working with this person, then they're gonna want to know what kind of person you are before they give you a call. Help them fill in the blanks. Build your reputation. If it's on Google, then yeah. If it's not, there are communities that don't use the internet still. They use word of mouth. And so if you're not using Google to help you reinforce your branding, then you need to use people to reinforce your branding. So if other people have worked with you and can speak on your behalf, then use that. But building your reputation is first.
That's
getting
key.
the projects and saying no to projects. If you have a gut feeling with a new client that it's not a good situation, don't get in it. There will be other projects, there will be other clients, and you don't have to take everything that comes to your door. And when we're starting businesses, it's really easy to say yes to everything that comes to your door. But when you're planning, we shouldn't work that way. We need to plan our business, and we need to think ahead and strategically decide what kind of projects we want to work on, what kind of clients we want to work on, how much money we want to bring in. Plan it all out first. Don't just answer every call that comes in. You know what you're good at. You know what projects you want to do. Find those, learn how the people get their information, who they contact first, whether it's banks or real estate people or contractors, however the system works, learn that system and get in that system. And then be the person that people refer. You know, that's how business works.
I couldn't have said it better. So, well, hey, I really appreciate you. I appreciate you taking your time before running into a new meeting here. Folks, if they want to connect with you, Facebook and LinkedIn are the best?
Yes, Facebook and LinkedIn are the best.
You can find her at Mandy Freeland on Facebook or Mandy Freeland AIA over on LinkedIn. Thanks so much again for taking the time, and have a great day.
Thank you, Jake. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, I hope that was helpful. Any other questions for Mandy, leave them down in the comments below, and we can circle back to those. And if you would, hop over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening and leave a review. I'd love to hear from you about your thoughts on the show. And if there are other guests that you might want to see on the show, other firms that you would like to know the stories about or understand how they came to be, send me a direct message. Jake Krakowski, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram. And until next week's show, make it a great week, because our success is inevitable. Take care. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you stay up to date with future episodes. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn at Jake Krakowski. And for show notes and much more, visit profitecturebydesign.com/podcast.